Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Relationship Renovation Podcast. I'm Tarah Kerwin.
And my name is EJ Kerwin.
And we're always just so grateful to our listeners for all of our topics, for all of the feedback and amazing reviews you guys have been giving us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It warms my heart. And I think EJ's too. I know I'm not trying to speak for you.
It's all right. Speak away.
When we get messages on our social media around how our podcasts are helping your relationship or just yourself so much. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It always gives us the motivation to keep doing it. Not that we need it because it's our love. So again, just wanted to do a lot of gratitude today.
Absolutely. And let's jump right in because we have a pretty cool topic.
I know, I'm excited.
Yeah. So we have a member of our staff. She's been on the show once before. Last time she sort of spoke about pets and how they're integrated into our life and what we kind of learn about our relationship sometimes through pets. And
we learned
so that
a
was
lot.
Cool. So this is Cristina Piastrini.
Hi.
She had a background in anthropology. She was an anthropologist for years. And then she became more fascinated, wanted to make a switch into the counseling field and psychology. And she is a therapist at our center. She's a licensed professional counselor. Welcome, Cristina. It's good to have you on our show again.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here again.
I also have to add that you're also pursuing your doctorate too.
Yeah.
What is your doctorate going to be in, Cristina?
Clinical psychology.
Clinical psychology. How's that going?
Slowly.
Slowly.
Slowly is okay.
Yeah.
What's fun about it?
What's fun is that I'm doing it at my own pace. And I see it more like it's a little bit of a hobby, as well as the pursuit of an interest. And it's also very valuable information and professional and even personal growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you maybe one more time just sort of give us a little bit background just on yourself and how you ended up in the field of psychology and just kind of recap for us?
Well, I started out as an art student. And then I became a student of anthropology for many years, and that's why I came to the Southwest. And I worked as an archaeologist for a while. And then I realized that I was more interested in real people than material remains. Mm-hmm. And I decided to become a counselor. And that's what I'm doing now. And I enjoy it. I think it's a very challenging type of work, but also very interesting and very rewarding at both an emotional and intellectual level.
I'm always just fascinated hearing your story, Cristina. You have so many amazing stories, but just like how you got here and all your different talents and where you're going with the doctorate degree and your professional counselor degree. It's just, and then hearing you in our staff meetings and our group supervision, it's just always like you make me laugh. You have this great sense of humor, but also you bring this intelligence that in my brain doesn't work that way. And I'm just like, I'm constantly learning from you for sure.
I think you are very kind, Tarah.
True.
You really are.
When I read your notes for this podcast and then remembering your notes also coming into the first one, like it really dawned on me again just how much sort of your academic background and your anthropological and archaeological background does inform the way you sort of look at people, and their struggles.
Yes, I mean, that's where I come from. That's what elicited an interest in counseling. I mean, our psychological experience, it's individual and ours, but it's determined by a variety of other factors, of course, such as evolutionary dynamics, cultural dynamics. So I kind of like to keep into consideration a variety of systems and domains in order to understand what is going on.
Yeah, beyond just the surface, right?
Beyond just the surface or beyond just the individual phenomenological experience.
And I feel like that feels like it's so whole. It's not like you're just going through from one system and having more of this like narrow view. Like you are bringing together multiple systems to try to understand an individual or a relationship system. I love that.
So let's dive in. This
Yes.
is a good topic. I think
a
a lot
good
of people out there will
topic.
relate. So today we're going to talk about the relationship between mother-in-laws
And daughter-in-law.
and daughter-in-law specific.
Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. Yes.
Ooh.
Why is that interesting?
Yeah, tell
or
us.
relevant? Well, the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law is found to be a very difficult one, and that is across cultures. I mean, it's not just here. I mean, this is a universal characteristic of this relationship. And it is very relevant in clinical practice because if about 60% of families experience difficult relationships between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law,
Wow.
of course, I mean, families are impacted by this.
Absolutely.
Well, especially because for the most part, we're talking here in heterosexual relationship, right? Is that I assume that the relationship between the son and the mother, and then the relationship between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, like it creates a kind of a complex triangle, right?
It creates a complex triangle. It's interesting that you bring up the possibility that maybe same-sex relationships may not function under similar attachment or psychodynamic as the traditional family of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. So that's something that I have not researched. I haven't read anything about that, but certainly it's a topic of interest as well.
Absolutely. That makes me curious too.
So tell us about like why is that mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship complex? Like what have you learned?
I mean, it's just a confirmation of a very common sense intuitive interpretation. I mean, there is a conflict of interest. There are fuzzy boundaries, and here come the problems. So the evolutionary perspective explains this as being a genetic conflict of interest where in-laws do not hold the same genetic patrimony or value of blood relatives. So there is a difference. And when couples get together or form by marriage or, just by relationships, there is a conflict of interest because the blood relatives are vested into the optimal reproduction and survival of their own offsprings. So in many ways, there are domains in which they have a common interest, yet there are domains in which the interest and the genetic fitness are not similar. So the lack of shared genes and other fitness asymmetries in potential future reproduction between parents can lead to conflict itself. I mean, those are dynamics that operate at very unconscious levels. I mean, beyond unconscious. I mean, this is the way we are shaped. For example, the experience of kin inclusion. How do you favor and love more and are more interested about the success of your own kin versus some guy next door that you don't know? Does that feel like something natural?
Yeah. The thing that jumps out to me is the word loyalty. Is that
Loyalty, yes.
that this sort of like evolutionary connection that the mother-in-law has to her offspring versus the daughter-in-law, son-in-law, whatever,
exactly,
creates like this like imbalance in the relationship where it's almost like we pretend like, oh, I love you just as much. Now that you married my kid, I love you just as much. But there's this like biological need and drive to almost always be more loyal.
Of course. I mean, that's a natural one.
Yeah.
I mean, we can mediate this culturally in some ways. There are contexts that are more inclusive and people, view one another as being more participant to one's idea of group. And there are contexts where there is a little bit more of a separation and it's more like us versus them.
Yes.
And that plays out, in many other types of social relationships. And this is a characteristic of the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship. So there is a conflict, it's a genetic conflict, of course, and that explains for the ways in which we are geared to experience this relationship. Mm-hmm. Also, there are psychological explanations for that as well. I mean, there is a psychoanalytical perspective, for example, and I'm not going to describe that in details. I mean, as you know, this kind of Electra reverse complex, I mean, one can take this with a grain of salt. But it comes down to competition for the attention of one man. Yep. I mean, two women competing for the attention of one man.
Well, and there's that old relationship that the son has with the mother that's been going on forever, that started since he was a little boy, and then suddenly there's this new person in who, for the most part, has his almost exclusive attention. And I mean, is there research around like the competitiveness that might result between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law?
Absolutely, yes. Now, there is research over the type of distress, some kind of qualitative research on the type of distress, is context in which tensions arise. And interestingly, in the Western world, especially the US, where there is a tendency to standardize our psychological experience and to ideally put it or expect from it parameters that someone calls emotional pedagogies, which means you're supposed to feel this way and this way. Everything is supposed to be under control and everything needs to be taking place in a very positive way and boundaries and so on and so forth. So people get to enter this kind of relationships with the best intentions and with good heart, and then suddenly, often right after the date of the wedding, a very distressful psychological experience begins taking place. And because of this lack of knowledge or lack of attention, then families, individuals begin experiencing confusion, disappointment, resentment, feeling of intrusions, control, and incredible anxiety, some kind of a primordial anxiety. And I mean, you can see the practicalities of how that happens.
For sure. What's coming up for me is, I've worked with multiple couples where this is a significant issue, and then the partner, the wife usually feels like, well, my husband's not setting boundaries with his mom and I don't feel protected. And I've always looked at it as a boundary thing, and to bring this whole evolutionary genetic loyalty piece into it, like, I'm glad now that I can provide that psychoeducation, but it would be about boundaries. Well, like, this is your family unit now, kind of what you were saying. In Western society, we have this like way of kind of how it should be. And then it becomes like the man's responsibility to fix it somehow.
Sure. And the son-in-law generally is put on a very difficult spot.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. Not only because of disattachment, this kind of conflict of interest pertaining emotional attachments, but also because there is a perceived need to continue the flow of relationships, because there are areas of cooperation between in-laws that were also geared for. So, the families need to get along and the children need to see the grandparents and vice versa. And the son-in-law is usually the one who is pretty much
navigating it.
Or
orchestrating it even.
Perhaps that...
Or avoiding it.
That's not an easy role to play.
Absolutely not.
Tara,
not when you
it's
bring...
not an easy role to play over there.
Wow, you're so vain. You're making this all about you, buddy. Wasn't even thinking of you.
So Tara, what do you think, like, in couples you've seen, and even yourself, you're a daughter-in-law, what are the expectations of the relationship between daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws?
Oh, I feel like you're putting me on the spot here. Mom, if you're listening, mom-in-law, I love you, but I'm just going to be honest. For me, I was immediately like expected to just like go within the family system and, okay, like why haven't you called today? I haven't heard from you. Is everything okay? And like, I come from a pretty detached family unit, lots of trauma. And I enter into EJ's family, which is like they talk every day, multiple times a day. They live near one another. It was like, what is going on?
Like you just have to jump into the pre-existing system and do it the way they're doing it. Otherwise, it's like problematic, right?
Yeah. And then I felt like I had to be like this. Like when we found out we were pregnant with the twins, I know you had a different experience with your previous marriage and the way that like they were able to be grandparents with them. And so then I felt like this level of responsibility and expectation to make sure they were like just a part of our family. Like they were the parents of the twins. Like that felt really just confusing because I love your mom, but I also like, I just felt a lot of responsibility to like be this perfect everything, the perfect wife, the perfect mom, to make sure I'm graceful when I'm overwhelmed, to not really have feelings. That goes back to my own trauma childhood. I'm getting off here.
So
I'm
in some
myself.
ways it's helpful and supportive, but then again, it also adds a layer of stress.
It was very helpful and very supportive, but then I felt like I owed something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I felt like I was, what is the word I'm looking for? Like that I had to like provide all of this attention and time because they were supporting me. So now I'm mandated to like call mom, check
emotional
in with,
obligation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think like in a general sense, I think what it is like that when you come into that new family unit, that then if you at all want to change the rules or do it a different way, then you're seen as a disruptor. Mm-hmm. Not that you're coming in with your own system and just your own experiences and your own rhythms that just sort of like fit in, but it's like you are perceived as somebody who's
ruffling the feathers.
And that's not just with you. I think that's what we've seen over the years working with, especially when there's a family where maybe one is tighter than the other, or vice versa. Somebody who's used to having a really tight family and goes into a family where there's tons of distance and they want that connected relationship. They're like, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong with these people? Why don't they care more? Why don't they want to be involved more?
Or vice versa. What's wrong with these people? I mean, didn't they achieve separation and individuation from one another?
Yeah.
I mean, I also note that at times, and this is also, the same with other domains or other subject of clinical practice, the less an individual understands about what is going on, the less a person is able to express and identify and express feelings, the more this person may be prone to just experience anger and dismissal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I can stand them. Okay, she is a blah, blah.
Just a whole negative narrative around
narrative around that, mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, and then like you said, it's this interesting like blending of like units and with separate agendas, that you've created a new partnership with this person and you're trying to create a new relationship and a new way of life that's a blend of your two just ways of being. And then you have your, family of origin hanging out there, kind of influencing from the outside with their own needs, wanting things to stay the same they've always been. And then it's like, how do you all navigate it together? And how does that mother-daughter?
That's what we want to know, Cristina.
Yeah. How do the mother-daughter have a healthy relationship?
Well, it may take some work and it may take some acceptance, negotiation. What happens that, there is an ongoing conflict and negotiation truces. I mean, more than one articles that I have read talks about truces, which means
Truces, yeah.
some kind of patterned timeline in which they achieve some kind of mutual understanding.
Agreement.
And eventually there will be another conflict.
And realignment of boundaries, right?
Realignment of boundaries,
yes, figuring out.
or recalibration, renegotiation of boundaries.
I like that, the renegotiation.
Yeah.
So in the US, those are the domains that have been seen as affected and sources of distress. Mother-in-law is closer to another child-in-law than
that's
the
one,
one.
right?
Mother-in-law is interfering in the marital relationship. Daughter-in-law feel they cannot speak directly to their mother-in-law about important matters and expect their spouse to do a good communication. And that is a very difficult one. You know, that's an expectation that at times brings conflict into the couple as well. The mother-in-law is withholding, is being passive-aggressive. Mother-in-law makes them feel anxious. I mean, anxiety is perhaps the most prevalent feeling in this experience.
Because it creates insecurity, right? It creates insecurity in the relationship.
Creates insecurity in the relationship. And I have a couple in which the daughter-in-law expressed she's experiencing this conflict with the mother-in-law, which came kind of unexpected. She really is expressing a tremendous amount of anxiety. That's why they came to couples counseling. And it's almost like a primordial type of anxiety. So I asked this client to express the irrational thoughts about this experience. And she pretty much framed it in terms of, sometimes I feel like it's either me or her. So, I mean, that was a very interesting way in which she expressed her instinctive perception of this conflict.
That fits into the, what is it, Electra and...
Reverse Electra
reverse.
conflict.
Yeah. Can you we use to spell that out to people that aren't familiar with that story?
Yeah, I didn't really want to bring up
Sorry.
too much the
Freudian
psychodynamic,
stuff. Yeah.
also because, in this case, it goes back into the Oedipal complex, and we all know what that elicits to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's that like bond between son and mother, where it's almost like this
sexual state.
Yeah, like it's this deep love and like loyalty.
Sure, and a lot of people are very resistant to this kind of narrative. It's kind of annoying at times. It's very patriarchal. So mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, I mean, at the center of the conflict is the son. Because of the repression of the incest taboo, displacement takes place, becomes internalized, and then realized through the choice of the marriage partner. The marriage partner who the boy chooses is unconsciously his mother. So repression causes the incest taboo, but it also results in displacement, which in turn explains the rivalry and so on and so forth. I mean, go and explain this to the clients.
Well, I mean, basically that the son is placed into the dynamic creates a competition between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law for the son and husband's attention.
Exactly.
And loyalty again.
Exactly. I mean, the psychoanalytic perspective also holds some kind of projection that becomes kind of a triangle in many ways. Where this psychological conflict of love can become very toxic.
Well, and how do you realign boundaries in a healthy way when one of the people, the son in this case, feels like he's pulled in two directions in loyalty? They're like, I have to do everything I can to create these healthy boundaries for my wife, but I have this relationship with my mother that I've had for however many years.
And I just feel torn, like the male's feeling torn between that.
Yes. I think the most difficult role is being played by the husband/son-in-law.
EJ, what's it been like, your experience, to navigate with me a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship? Mom, if you're listening,
yeah,
you know we love you.
So for me, it's not just about the relationship between you and my mom. It's been more about navigating the like relationship between just you and my family's way. You know, and so the mom stuff comes in a little bit, but it's more about like the boundaries of our family versus sort of the boundaries of your family, or the boundaries of just like you and I trying to figure out like how do we have a sort of a system that is ours and still have them be, you know, because they're close, they're literally close. And so that's been hard, you know, because there is like this feeling of like loyalty to them. And if like we're at all trying to change the rules of it, like, and I think you are just as like confused about how to do that as me. Like, how do we be respectful and loving, but at the same time, like have our own like new systems that arise, whether it's about time, energy, parenting, whatever. It's really hard.
So what if, because I feel like I have a great relationship with a good daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship, but I've seen, and you've worked with couples it's really, that dynamic, that relationship is very difficult to understand what's going on. There's a lot of unconscious pieces behind it.
Yeah.
We're bringing in different systems, evolutionary, psychological, psychodynamic. Like, how do you, when it's not healthy, when the guy is in the middle, they don't have the tools to understand what it is or even know how to set boundaries. Like, how do you help navigate them?
To address
Thank you.
And resolve or improve.
Yeah. Any of the above, Cristina.
Well, I mean, what you were saying before, what you do with your clients, working on boundaries. I mean, it all goes back to that.
Yeah.
I mean, helping clients to express feelings and emotions, you know, getting some kind of insight, providing a little bit of psychoeducation, but then ultimately it's all about boundaries. Of course, it's not that simple because the client himself or herself, in this case, is part of a wider family system.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes there may have to be some kind of family therapy.
Yeah.
And obviously the son or husband is a very important person in this kind of family conflict.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, did the son achieve psychological separation from the mother figure?
Right. What's the level of differentiation?
Differentiation.
Right?
If not, I mean, I can see problems extending to, you know, the whole family dynamics. So in that case, yes, therapy, of course.
Yeah. I feel like one thing that's important that I'm hearing, and I think that's going to be important for our listeners to really understand, is like normalizing that this is a universally complex relationship. And
yes,
it's not that there's just something wrong with you if you're having a stress, that this is right. And if we can understand it better, that feels a little like, okay, it's like evolutionary based and it's all these other things based.
I mean, I ordered a book called What Do You Want From Me? And the author is Terry Apter, Terriapter. And she gives a very good summary of these domains that we have discussed. Why this relationship is problematic, how does that affect the whole family system, what can be done. And I think it's pretty good. I mean, this is for the general client. I'm not talking about, you know, there may be actually family and clients who do need more than just reading a book. I mean, they need therapeutic support for sure.
But reading a book is still probably like just, again, a good way to soak in some more knowledge and more curiosity.
And she talks about sense of humor also, you know, being able to, you know, add some sense of humor to the narrative in view of relationships that are, you know, already geared to be difficult. So
Imbalance.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like most topics, if you can get to a place of being empathetic about each other's experience, you got a decent chance of getting somewhere with it. But I think a lot of times in a relationship like this, where it is really complicating your relationship with your partner, your relationship with your extended family or your nuclear family, it's like getting some help. I mean, getting somebody to be that mediator.
Absolutely, because the experience can be devastating, can actually be traumatic, devastating.
Yeah.
It can actually elicit residuals, of previous trauma, attachment trauma.
Absolutely.
And at times, even with rational or factual knowledge, it may be very difficult for a person to work through this kind of traumatic confrontation and experiences. I mean, it brings into question your own sense of self.
Absolutely.
It can be devastating.
And one thing that's just coming up for me now is just like, even hearing you talk, Cristina, and hearing the knowledge around this, like I have more compassion for EJ's role in this, right?
Yes,
like being able
absolutely.
to have that compassion piece for the partner, because usually, and I had one couple where there was no compassion. There was just this expectation for this husband to set these boundaries. They ultimately ended up divorcing, unfortunately, because he couldn't,
yes.
He had to avoid. He was avoidant attachment type anyway, could not do it, but there was no compassion and understanding about what his role was. So I'm hearing like,
Right.
How do we gain compassion for the person that's in that role, the son, who's having to navigate his own process with this? And it can't just be about the daughter-in-law or the mother-in-law.
Exactly. And even the experience of the son or husband can be excruciating, confusing, ridden with guilt, sense of inadequacy, desperation. I mean, we're talking about some really, really harsh dynamics.
Oh, no, I had one couple, he literally cut off from his mother because he didn't want to upset his wife anymore because she was really upset. And then after the divorce, like now him and his mother are really close.
Sure.
But
I mean, he had
like,
to make a decision that he was never able to accept and live with. And then it becomes, there are repercussions to these kind of decisions for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, maintaining kin relations is after all an imperative.
Yeah.
I mean, we are also programmed to want to achieve that.
Yeah, I can see that. I just have so much of a better understanding now when we're talking to you, Cristina, about the different systems that come into play. Like it's not just about boundaries.
Yeah.
It's not just about that.
So this is a problem that is not very much talked about. I mean, yes, there are a lot of jokes about mother-in-laws and, stereotypes. But there is a feeling and also observation that most people actually get into marriages and relationships not knowing that in most cases they're not. This kind of very disruptive dynamics may jump up, and not knowing that this is normal, that this is at times expected, not knowing how to deal with that, not knowing how to make sense with that, and falling into some kind of traps of having to choose either one or the other.
And it doesn't have to be that way, yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way, and this is certainly an arena in which family mental health, couples mental health may be very helpful to prevent resentment to crystallize, to disrupt family dynamics that are important and beneficial to everyone. So I do recommend people to seek family therapy, couples therapy, and not discount this kind of suffering, misunderstood suffering that actually takes place in more than 6% of couples and families.
Yep. I want to say thank you to Cristina for highlighting this area. Again, we could probably spend hours on this podcast because there's so many different directions you could go, but to really bring this up, highlight it, normalize it, start to take little chunks out of it is huge.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think the big kind of take home from this is the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship is a complex one. there's a lot of reasons for it that just are set up by our biology, like a lot of the struggles we have in a relationship. And boundaries is certainly a way in which we can go about addressing it, but sometimes it's just important that we get some help.
Absolutely, because this can be a very traumatic experience, and it can damage the relationship, can damage family relations, sense of self, and everything else. It can bring to depression, it can bring to chronic anxiety.
All right. Well, thank you, Cristina.
Thank you, Cristina. Always just so grateful for you and what you bring to our center and to couples and individuals that you work with. So thank you for your beautiful brain.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It's my pleasure.
All right, Tarah. Well, another great podcast.
Yeah, I think so. And as always, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Me and you just singing on the train.